Have you ever seen courage meet justice in the most epic way? When a racist talk show host tried to tear down a black businesswoman, she delivered a clapback that had the world cheering. This is a story of empowerment, resilience, and standing up for what's right. Simone Jackson wasn't just any entrepreneur. At 32, she had built a business empire from nothing, not only achieving personal success, but also lifting up her community. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, Simone believed that her success meant little if she couldn't pave the way for others. Her latest initiative, a program designed to help young black women access resources and opportunities for entrepreneurship, was proof of that commitment. So when she received an invitation to appear on Morning Perspective, one of the most watched talk shows in the country, Simone was thrilled. It was a chance to share her journey and highlight the incredible young women her program was supporting. The host, Charlene Whitaker, had a reputation. She was respected but also feared for her ability to ask uncomfortable, provocative questions. Some admired her boldness, while others accused her of being needlessly confrontational. But Simone wasn't worried. She had faced tougher challenges before, and she wasn't about to back down now. On the day of the interview, Simone walked into the studio in Los Angeles wearing a sharp cobalt blue suit, radiating confidence. A makeup artist complimented her glow, and she smiled, masking any nerves beneath her poised exterior. As she stepped onto the brightly lit stage, she took a deep breath. The studio buzzed with crew members, cameras, and the murmurs of a live audience. Charlene was already seated, flashing a wide but unreadable smile. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have a self-made entrepreneur rewriting the rules of business, Simone Jackson. Charlene announced as the audience applauded. Simone, we're so glad to have you. Simone leaned slightly forward, her warm smile unwavering. Thank you, Charlene. I'm excited to be here and share the work we're doing. The first few minutes went smoothly. Simone spoke about her journey from selling handmade jewelry at flea markets to running a multi-million-dollar company. Charlene listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with questions. Everything seemed routine until the conversation shifted toward Simone's community initiative. Suddenly, Charlene's compliments took on a different tone, laced with subtle skepticism. Simone, Charlene said, tilting her head thoughtfully, do you think programs like yours exist because people aren't working hard enough to succeed on their own? The air in the studio tightened. Simone paused, but only for a brief moment. Charlene, she responded calmly, this isn't about who works harder. It's about the very real barriers that exist. My program isn't a replacement for effort. It's about making sure everyone has a fair shot. Applause rippled through the audience, but Charlene only smiled, her eyes glinting as if she had found a crack to exploit. I understand, Charlene nodded. But don't you think focusing too much on these barriers can lead to excuses instead of action? After all, many people have pulled themselves up without any help. Isn't that the essence of the American dream? A few murmurs ran through the audience, some clapped, others simply watched. Simone, however, remained unfazed. She had heard arguments like this before. In classrooms, boardrooms, and even within her own family. She smiled, steady and sure. Charlene, she said, the American dream sounds great, but it doesn't account for the fact that some people face greater obstacles than others. A pair of shoes might help you run, but if your shoes don't have laces or worse, if they were taken away from you, you'll always be behind. Laughter and applause erupted from the audience. Simone seized the moment. My program isn't running the race for anyone, it's just giving them back their shoelaces so they can run it themselves. Charlene's smile twitched slightly, her eyes flicking toward the producers, as if recalculating her approach. Simone had scored a point, but the host wasn't done yet. I get that, Charlene said, her voice still sweet but sharper now. But some argue that focusing too much on race and inequality only divides us further. Shouldn't we be emphasizing unity instead of pointing out our differences? Simone tilted her head, her voice thoughtful but firm. Unity is a beautiful thing, she said, but how can we build a bridge if we don't acknowledge the river that separates us? Ignoring our differences doesn't make them disappear, it just leaves more people stranded on the other side. This time, the applause was even louder. Charlene faltered, if only for a second, before regaining her polished demeanor. Fair point, she admitted, but she immediately shifted gears. Still, your program is exclusively for young black women. Isn't that a form of exclusion? Simone felt a flicker of irritation, but kept her expression composed. Simone had heard this question countless times before. Usually it came from people who didn't understand or didn't want to understand the importance of supporting marginalized communities. This isn't exclusion, she said steadily. It's intentional. If a roof is leaking, you don't rebuild the entire house, you fix the problem at its source. That's what my program does. It fills the gaps so entire communities can rise. The audience applauded, but Charlene wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and leaned back, her tone laced with skepticism. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but some might say programs like yours promote dependency. What do you say to that? Simone raised an eyebrow, a faint smile forming. Dependency, she repeated. Tell me, Charlene, when banks provide loans to help small businesses, do we call that dependency? Or do we call it an investment? That's what this program is, an investment in young women, giving them the tools to succeed on their own. This time, the applause was louder. Charlene shifted uncomfortably, recrossing her legs. But don't you think programs like this make some people feel left out? She pressed. We live in a time when everyone wants to feel included. Inclusion is important, Simone agreed, but it doesn't mean ignoring real disparities. If a student is struggling, you don't hold the entire class back to make it fair. You give that student extra support so they can catch up. And when they do, the whole class benefits. A charged silence settled over the studio, but Charlene wasn't done. Interesting perspective, she said, smirking. But don't you think focusing so much on race actually perpetuates division? Some might even call it a form of reverse discrimination. The audience gasped. Simone exhaled slowly, keeping her composure. What's truly ironic, she said, her voice calm but firm, is how people twist equity into something it's not. Segregation was about shutting people out. What I'm doing is the opposite. I'm opening doors that have been closed for generations. A thunderous round of applause erupted. Some audience members even rose to their feet. Charlene's polished facade cracked for just a second before she forced a tight smile. Well, Simone, she said, her voice sharper now. What do you say to hardworking people who feel overlooked by programs like yours? How is that fair? Simone's gaze didn't waver. We can't talk about fairness if we ignore inequality in the first place. The audience roared with approval. Charlene knew she had lost, but she smiled anyway, masking her frustration behind a carefully curated expression. Simone clenched her jaw for a brief moment, enough for anyone paying attention to notice before her expression returned to calm, replaced by a determined resolve that couldn't be ignored. She leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and unwavering. All right, Charlene, Simone said, repeating the word with a quiet strength, but with clear meaning. Let me ask you something. When a firefighter puts out a burning house, does anyone accuse them of being unfair to the houses that aren't burning? Or do we thank them for protecting the neighborhood? The room went silent. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one that made everyone lean forward, waiting for the next part of the conversation. Even the camera crew paused, their eyes fixed on Simone. That's what this program is, Charlene, Simone continued, her tone still firm. It's like putting out a fire. It's about addressing the special needs of those who have been forgotten, overlooked, and underserved for far too long. And when we lift them up, when we give them the chance to grow, nothing is taken from anyone else. In fact, it makes the community stronger. Charlene was about to speak, but Simone raised her hand not to interrupt rudely, but to ensure that she was not finished. And don't pretend, Simone said, her voice now carrying the weight of years of experience, that these conversations about fairness are truly about fairness. Because when we talk about fairness, we're really talking about comfort. Whose comfort? Whose inconvenience are we willing to ignore? And if solving injustice makes someone uncomfortable, maybe that's a discomfort we all need to learn to accept. The room erupted in applause, cheers, and standing ovations. It wasn't just strong applause, it was the kind of applause that couldn't be ignored, signaling that Simone had struck at the heart of the issue. She leaned back, calm, but her eyes burned with an inner fire. She had said what needed to be said, and she knew it had landed exactly where it was supposed to. Charlene, looking a bit flustered now, the usual composure she carried seemed to crack. She hurriedly grabbed a glass of water, took a sip, and forced a smile. Well, Simone, I can see you're passionate. I understand why your program gets so much support. But let me ask you one thing. Simone cut her off, polite but resolute. Before you ask me anything else, Charlene, let me ask you a question, she said, leaning forward. The room went quiet, and this time the shift in energy was palpable. Have you ever wondered, when you hear stories about someone pulling themselves up, who made those shoes, and who decided which shoes were worth investing in? Simone asked, her words sharp, like a knife. Charlene froze, unable to answer immediately. Simone's question wasn't just a question, it was a deep cut into the core of Charlene's ongoing narrative. The room went silent again, but this time, it wasn't a wait for Simone to continue. but a wait for Charlene to respond, and she didn't have an answer. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. When Simone finished asking, a long pause took over the room, and what happened next would become a moment everyone would remember. Charlene sat there, her mouth moving but no words coming out. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the moment of helplessness while Simone sat composed, her hands neatly folded in her lap, her expression one of perfect calm. She had said what needed to be said, and she knew it had landed exactly where it was meant to. Behind the scenes, the film crew began sharing online. Hashtags like Simone Jackson and Morning Perspective quickly became trending topics. Clips of Simone's sharp response were shared on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok with comments like "She said what needed to be said and put out the fire. Don't ignore it," receiving thousands of likes and shares. As for Simone, sitting in the dressing room, she had time to breathe and glance through her phone. Texts from friends and messages of support from strangers warmed her heart. But Simone knew the criticism would come. She wasn't surprised by it. She understood that the criticism wasn't about her style or approach, it was because she wouldn't shrink back to make others feel comfortable. She wouldn't apologize for that. By noon, Simone had returned to her hometown, greeted by a small group of young women from her program who had gathered at the community center, eagerly waiting for her. Among them was Alia, a 19-year-old whose face was streaked with tears. She stepped forward, her phone clutched tightly in her hands, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Miss Simone," Alia said softly, her words barely above a whisper. "I watched the interview last night. I saw how you stood up for us, for all of us. I just wanted to say thank you. You made me believe in myself again. You made me feel like I can do anything." Simone's heart swelled with emotion as she gazed at the young woman before her. She gently placed a hand on Alia's shoulder, her voice tender but strong. "Alia," she said, her eyes filled with warmth. "You don't need me to make you feel that way. That strength, that power, it's already inside of you. I'm just here to help you see it for yourself, to help you remember that you're capable of more than you ever imagined." The words hung in the air, a quiet moment of understanding between them. But Alia's smile said it all. The spark had been lit, and Simone could see it. She had done something that mattered. Later that day, Simone stood before a small group of participants in her program, sharing the experience of her talk show appearance and the lessons she had learned. Her voice was steady, but there was a fire in her words, a passion that resonated with each of them. "Listen," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The world isn't always going to offer you respect. It won't always offer you fairness. Sometimes you have to demand it. Sometimes you have to fight for it. And when that moment comes, I want you to remember this: your story, your voice, your worth. They're never up for a debate. Not ever." The room was silent, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. It was a silence filled with understanding, with a newfound strength. Simone could see it in their eyes. They were ready. Ready to stand up for themselves, ready to take on the world. And in that moment, she knew her work had meaning. She knew it was making a difference. As she left the building that evening, the sun casting a soft golden light on the horizon, Simone paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the world around her. She thought about her journey, how it hadn't always been easy. There had been setbacks, doubts, and obstacles along the way. But despite it all, she had remained steadfast in her purpose to create change, to inspire those around her, and to leave the world better than she found it. And as she stood there with the weight of the day lifting from her shoulders, she knew she had done just that.